Hello everyone, my name is Moulk, and today I'm gonna show you a mod for Dungeondraft called Soft Shadows. I've been working on this mod for a few months now with the help of Claude AI, and the mod has been released on cartographyassets.com a few days ago, so now is the perfect time to show you how it works. First of all, I would like to apologize if this video seems a bit messier than some of my other videos, because it is totally unscripted, so there will be some improvisation and some errors, and I apologize for that in advance. Before we start, I'd like to say a big thank you to everyone on Discord who helped me with this mod and with their feedback, so I could make it better before the official release, and special thanks to Rakuz, because, well, you know why. So the big question now is, why do we need a mod for shadows? That's something that I've learned really early in my map-making journey, is that when you add shadows and when you add lights to your maps, it can change everything. It can make it look so much better. So here's, for example, a map I made, and there's a lot of things, a lot of clutter, many assets everywhere, and there is no shadow at all here. And I will show you right now how it looks like with shadows and lights. And here we go. So you can see right away that everything is more defined, everything looks more natural, and it's also a lot more legible than before, which looked totally flat, as you can see. And almost every shadow here has been crafted with the mod. I will show you how to achieve that with the mod in a few minutes, but before that I need to switch to another map. So first you need to know what to look for in the tools. So if you go, for example, in the wall tool, which is one with the shadows, you can see here the soft shadow line with this icon, and each time you see this icon it will mean that it's related to the mod. So you can find it in the wall tool, you can find it in the roof tool here, you can find it in the path tool here, and in the objects tool and the scatter tool too. And of course you can find it in the selection tool when you select an asset that can have a soft shadow. And there is another thing, in the level settings there is a little icon here to totally disable on the level, but that's for later. Okay, so here we are in the object tool. So the line about the shadows is here, and here above it you have the default shadow from Dungeondraft, the vanilla one. Make sure it is disabled, otherwise you will see it around your object and it will clash with the soft shadows. So to enable it, just click on off, it will toggle it on, and as you can see, the shadow is pretty different from the default one, and without shadow, here it is. Now we can go in the selection tool to change the settings. For example, here I click on my asset and I see here the line about the shadow, and there is a little icon, a cog icon, that you can press to display all the settings you can change. So for example, there is the opacity of the shadow, the blur, which makes it larger or smaller. You can also change the offset of the shadow, so it's not directly under the asset. And if that's not far enough, you can change the max distance here. Okay. Each setting has a little reset button, so you can reset everything by clicking on each reset button. There is also a main reset button here, and the main reset button is also here at the bottom. So, okay. You can also change the color of the shadow, because why not? that's about it for the main features, the simple ones. But there are also some other ones, like the style of the shadow. You can use the simple one is the offset, but you can project the shadow in extrude mode or stretch mode. So it depends on how you want the shadow to look. For example, the extrude mode would be something like this. It takes all the points from the geometry and makes it like a full shape. You can fade it or not. Projected styles are mostly for realistic shadows or something that would look a bit more realistic. Either the extrude mode or the stretch mode. And you will see the stretch mode, how it looks. It's a bit different, but sometimes when you have a lower light source, maybe you want the shadow to be looking a bit distorted like this. So that can be helpful. It's just some trick because obviously this is not a 3D asset, so you can't really make a shadow look like it's 3D, but it kind of works. Okay, so now we have also these buttons. Let's say you don't want the shadow to be above the coffin, so you select the one on top and you select shadow behind layer, and now the shadow will be under the assets that are on the same layer. And there is also the stop by walls and stop by path features, which are pretty neat. For example, if you draw a wall or if you draw a path, and you can make the shadow being blocked here by the wall and here by the path too. So yes, it's pretty interesting when you don't want things to overlap. That's really helpful. And the last thing you want to know is you can change the default values. So for example, let's say I want this type of shadow to be the default value for all my assets because it fits everything. I'm just clicking here and I'm clicking on use as default values. And now you can see there is a factory reset button just next to it. So if you want to reset the values that are used by default, you click on this. But right now, if I create, let's say I'm using this one, I click on, and this one didn't have a shadow, and now I activated the shadow, and it's on this setting precisely. And it can be also on any new asset, for example this one. Yes, right now it doesn't look like it's the correct shadow, but if you click on the little lock icon here, it becomes the user default. You're using what you chose as default values, because sometimes it's just better to have the factory defaults at hand and can be able to choose like this. Of course, at the bottom there is a copy and paste button and a reset button, like I said earlier. And you have the button for applying the shadows to every object. So that's interesting. For example, let's say I'm using this one. And I click here. And now you see you have a few options. You can apply this shadow to every selected object, every object with no shadow, or every object, just every object. And you can also choose the layer, so all layers, or the current layer, or the filtered layer. Like the filtered layers are the ones from the filter here. So you can disable everything but like these two, and or whatever you want. So you can apply this shadow to everything you need at once. That can be very handy. And now every object has the same shadow. Okay, so now we are done with the objects. We can have a look at the wall tool. So the button is here, and when you click on it, you notice that there are some controls that appear. First of all, you have the simple mode and the realistic mode. Simple is, well, I'll just show you, it will be easier. And realistic here. So simple draws a simple shadow, and realistic draws a shadow according to the shape of the wall. Of course, the realistic one takes more resource, so if you don't need something really detailed, you can just stick with the simple mode. Then you have the sides. So by default, it's both sides, so above and below the wall, but you can have one side only or the other side. And of course, it also depends on the direction of your wall. For example, if I draw it this way or this way, it will be the opposite side. You have the same thing in realistic mode. And you have in simple mode the button extend ends with fade. So you see here, there is a cut at the end of the shadow, and sometimes you need that because it looks better for what you need, and sometimes you want it to be a bit more blurred at the end, so you can extend the shadow, for example here. Okay, so you see the end is not cut anymore. It's wrapping around the end. Maybe you noticed also this button here, which allows you to change the opacity and the look of the shadow. So in simple mode, you can change the opacity. The spread and the softness are a bit hard to explain, but let's say I only change the spread. The shadow will look like this, and if I only change the softness, the shadow will look like this. In realistic mode, you can see that these two sliders are replaced by blur, which is more effective, but it's the same, but it's just more effective because the rendering of the shadow is different. So it does both at the same time. And the opacity goes up to 2 instead of 1 in simple mode because, once again, because of the way the shadows are rendered in realistic mode, it's a bit different. So now we can have a look at the selection tool. You see when I click on the cog icon that you have a bit more controls. So for example, you have the portal thing, the skip portal. Basically, you have this shadow that stays under the portal, so it's a good thing in general. But sometimes here, your portal is just a hole in the wall, so you don't want to keep that under. It doesn't make any sense. So if you click on the wall and you click on skip portals, it will just skip them all. But if you want to keep one and skip one, you can click on the portal and here switch the shadow setting just for one portal. If two walls are one over the other, the shadow here of this wall is over this wall, and sometimes you don't want that, so you can click on the wall and click on below all walls, and now the shadow is on the same level as the shadow from this wall. You also have some options to extend the end. So for example, you can just have one end to be faded, or the other, or both. You can choose the shape of the ends. Sometimes it's useful. You have the offset option. It's not directly under your wall anymore. You can choose the max distance, of course. You can also have a radial offset, which is around the wall. So for example, sometimes you need it to be on one side or the other. So you can just choose this. And the side balance basically changes the size of one side and keeps the size of the other one. Of course, you have the color of the shadow here. You have the use as default button, and you have the reset, copy, paste button, same as in every other tool, and the apply to all walls. So you can select the selected walls, or every wall with no shadow, or every wall. Okay, now we can have a look at the path tool, which is really similar to the wall tool. You have the same features here, the same controls, so this is basically the same. Nothing more to explain in the tool itself, but when you draw a shadow and you select it, you have a bit different things you can have a look at. As for objects, you can have the shadow behind layer. The extend ends with fade is the same. You have the transition section, which is if you want to change the effect at the end. You can also change it side by side if you need. The same applies to grow and shrink, because sometimes your path grow and shrink too, so the shadow can be done according to that. And same, you can choose the way it grows and fades. You can also swap ends. So for example, let's say I have a fade here and a shrink here. So if I swap ends, it's the opposite. The fade is here and the shrink is here. The offset is the same, and you will see why the side balance is sometimes needed more than on walls. For this kind of path, which is more on one side than on the other, it can look just better if you change a bit the side balance. What it does actually is that it keeps the fade, but it makes it smaller or larger, which is not the case in the radial offset. The radial offset will just move the whole shadow. You will see sometimes some artifacts like this. That's something I can't really fix, but in realistic mode that doesn't happen. Okay, and now we have something interesting, which is the bend. So for example, let's have a look at this path. Let's say I have two cliffs here, and this is a canyon below the railroad. So we use the bend if we want to have the shadow look like it's dropped under the canyon. So for example, we have the entry point that we can change here. So I want it to be around here, the exit point around here, okay? And the ramp is the way it will be, if it will be a hard drop or not. So for example, with a hard drop, I will change the entry point so it's a bit, yes. Okay, and the exit point here, okay. I can change the distance too. And the opacity, because it's a bit too dark. So yeah, basically you can see this is looking a little more realistic. So the shadow is has dropped at the bottom of the canyon. So it's a feature that is not used every day, I agree, but it exists, and sometimes it can be really interesting for some kind of maps. You can also add a shadow over the path, which is the overlay. So let's say I want to have here on this side, just at the bottom, an overlay which is cast by the cliff itself. So you have the choice to use a horizontal or vertical overlay. So here I will choose vertical, and I will choose the side, which is the bottom one. I could choose both also. I will choose the fade. I will choose the opacity too. And I can do the same for the other side. And I can now add the other shadow I want. Yeah, I forgot something, which is crop at center in realistic mode. When you choose one side, you can see there is a bit of shadow that is cast here. And sometimes we don't want that, exactly like right now. So I can crop it at the center, and it will be kept just on one side. Now you can see that our cliffs look a bit better than before, because it looks a bit more natural with the shadows cast and the shadow on the cliff itself. So let's say you want some stairs. Here you can see there are already some shadows on the steps, so that means that the bottom is here, because the shadow is cast in this direction. So if I add a shadow overlay, you can add even more, so you can see that it is really darker at this point. Of course, on its own it's not really looking good, but it's a good visual cue to say, hey, this is lower than this part. It works even better if you are using some stairs that are curved, because curved shadows are a bit hard to do. So let's have a look again, and voila. You need to think that as part of a map, not just on its own like this, but the option works really well once you understand how to use it. Now we can have a look at the roof tool, which is still a bit experimental. So basically, when you draw a roof, the shadow will be on by default, but let's have a look at how it works without shadow. So here's the roof, and here's the roof with a shadow. So you can see already that looks a lot better, and it works according to the sun direction. So if I change it, you will see by default there is some contrast on the roof because the sun is pointing in that direction. So I can accentuate the contrast, and you will notice that the sun and the shadows are working together, which is, I think, pretty cool. I'm pretty proud of this. And when you select it in the selection tool, you can change, of course, a bit more things. The size of the shadows, the softness of the shadow, which is not working really great. I'm not really proud of this one, but I couldn't do it really better. You can change the ridge, the height of the ridge. Okay, so now we can have a look at some technical settings. So first, if you go into the level settings, you can see here there is an icon here, which is a button, and it will enable or disable the shadows for each level. So for example, here, I totally disable it, but on the ground, they are staying. So for example, if you have some issues with your GPU or something like that, which is a bit stuttering, you can maybe try to disable the shadows on one level. Maybe that will help. You can also hide the shadows, which is a bit different from disabling. Disabling totally removes the shadows, so they will be regenerated from scratch after clicking on the button here. But hiding the shadows here can just be a visual effect if you want to check where they are missing or where you put them. And then here in the Effects tab here, just under the Light tool, you have the soft shadow settings. So this is the really technical part. To be clear, I know shadows are a bit demanding on the CPU and GPU, and sometimes you will notice probably a bit of stutter, of lag, and I've been trying to optimize this the best I could. So every PC being different, I had to create different settings. So for example, there is the quality here. You can change the quality, especially for objects. Well, the lowest quality will be less hard on your GPU, but you can see it's not looking really great. But if you are using like different quality from far away, it doesn't look that bad until a certain point. The other important thing is here the rendering. So you have 3 types of rendering. The live rendering is when a shadow is created and you generate it in real time. It's a bit harder on your RAM, I believe, than the other ones. You have the bake auto rendering, which is the same for the first second or 2 seconds, I believe, and then all the shadows are baked, which is a way to make them like a texture and not a calculation. It can be helpful for your maps if you see some lag. Sometimes it doesn't work on some PCs, so maybe you will prefer the live version. Or you can try the bake manual if you want a bit of both. So for example, if you have a bake manual, that will be live until you click on bake all objects. You have a little text here saying basically what I'm saying, so just you're not lost when you choose. But if you've done all your shadows and you're pretty sure you don't want to change anything else, you can say you want to bake all the shadows, which is different than the rendering. Baking will create an image of the shadows, and that will save a lot of power, but you won't be able to change anything else. So for example, I can choose what I want to bake. So let's say just everything. I can render the shadows. Okay. Now you don't see any difference right now, but if I move something, you will see the shadow is staying on its place. Now they are not processed anymore in real time, which is good if you want to keep some power, but you can't change anything else. So you can unbake, and now they are back to normal and you can edit them. And if you want to render them again, you can do it. Finally, you can choose to enable or disable shadows on one specific level or every level. It's the same if you want to keep some processing power. It's the same as the button here in the levels. That's pretty much the same. Okay, so to finish this video, I would like to explain how I worked on shadows on this map. I've used a variety of techniques, but the main one was from the soft shadow mode. It couldn't be used everywhere, so I've used some other tricks, and I will show you what they are in an instant. So I think this one is a good example of what can be done with shadows. I will show you how it looks without shadows and lights here. So that's pretty flat, and with shadows you can achieve something really realistic. You don't need to do realistic stuff, but for this kind of map it works pretty well. So for example, let's talk about these statues. As you can see, I will copy a statue and have it here. First thing, there are two shadows here. There is the soft shadow underneath and the overlay above. So let's just talk about the shadow underneath. It's the offset style, but I could have used any of the other style for this statue. I think that would work pretty well in any case. And you can change the angle, of course, but you need to keep in mind that the shadow angle needs to match the light source direction. So here, for example, the light source is here, so the angle is a bit below the horizontal. Of course, if you have a very hard light, you need to avoid blur a maximum. But here, since the light is coming from the window, I think we can agree that the shadow can be a bit blurred. I think that makes sense. And now I'm gonna hide the shadow underneath and we will have a look at the overlay, which is created because I wanted to darken that side, which isn't lightened, because the lights come from here, as you see. And here I've managed to make something that mimics what reality would look like, I think. Well, once again, there is no rule for that. You just need to try and see what looks good or not. And when we have both, you can see there is something that works really well with that. If we hide the overlay, it's not the same. It works, but it's not the same. So this one feels really anchored in the map. So I've made the same for all the statues, but with another angle for the other one. I've tried to make so the windows are casting the light here and here, but it's not. Yeah, just do what you think would work. I'd say you could do the same on the chairs. So, for example, here I've offset the shadow just a bit on the left. Same for this one here, but it's a simple shadow, just the offset, the classic offset, not something really fancy. But for the chairs on the right, I also added an overlay because that part of the chair would cast a shadow on the chair, and since the light comes from behind. So, for example, if I hide it, it works better with the overlay, I think. The table in the center was a prefab from Forgotten Adventures, so everything was already there on the table. It's not several assets, it's just one. So that was a bit trickier because making the shadows for something that already has assets baked in is pretty difficult, but it can be done. So first I tried to make the shadow under the table. So as for the other assets in the room, the shadow is cast on the left of the table. About what's on the table, this was a bit of work. So for example, if we compare with and without shadows, we'll see that I've added a lot of shadows on the left of every asset. Since the table is a prefab, I can't move the assets that are on it because they are part of the table. So I needed to add shadows with shadow path, which was the method that was mostly used before we had mods for shadows. If we invert the colors of the shadows, you can see here how much I've added on the table. Obviously, you don't need to do that. For example, if you select just the path and delete them, it still works. I've added it because I just wanted it it to be a little over the top. I've done it also for the kitchen, as you can see, because once again, these are prefabs, the tables here, here and here. Even though I used shadow path here and there on this map, I mostly used the soft shadow mode for every asset, because that's a lot easier to use and a lot faster. So my advice would be to make sure you know where the light comes from and just offset a little bit the shadow according to that. Most of the time you don't even need to do that, you can just change the opacity and the blur to make it a bit distinct from the background. And for the outside, I've added a few things. For example, for the trees, I've made the shadow really big, really large. I could have made it larger, but that worked fine. To give an impression of height for tall assets, shadows are the best way to give that impression. And the further the shadow will be, the taller your asset will seem. I've also added an overlay, so the tree looks like it's casting shadow on its leaves. I've also added some path, like this, some shadow path, to give some texture to the leaves. And the last thing I wanted to share is the shadow I made along the building. It's a small detail, but it makes the map feel so much more real. Because with a top-down map, you can't really feel the height of any building. So having a shadow, like for the trees, is what will help you define that height. I made it with a pattern. It's just any pattern that you can turn black and then make transparent. I've used the color and modify things mod from Ushideshi to make it like this, but also to have the blur on it, because you can see the edges are not hard. Here, that's how it looks like without the mod from Ushideshi. And I think that would work still. It's okay, but it looks a lot better if you have some blur on it. So drawing the pattern is not obvious for everyone. So what I've done here is that I've just made a pattern that is the full shape of the building. Then I moved it a bit diagonally and removed all the part that was inside the building. And then I made some diagonal lines to join the corners. You can see also that I've made some weird shapes here over the trees, because the tree is not supposed to be flat, so it wouldn't work if the shadow was flat over the tree. If I remove the shadow here, you can see it's working, but it's not the same. And now I'd like to take a moment to talk about the lights, because shadows and lights work together. As you can see, I've added lights on every window here on the map. That does make a small difference. And I'd like to show you how I made the light for the stained glass window here. As you can see here, I've used 3 different lights. There is a blue one, there is a pink one, and there is a green one, I believe. Yes, because these are the colors from the stained glass. And as you can see here, they are this kind of lights, which are not from the default, but you could use default, but it wouldn't work the same. So for example, if I push the intensity a little bit, and we are on this texture, you can see the shape of the light. And I've used colors to match the window. They are not exactly the same size or the same shape, so they give this multicolor vibe to the room. You can see I've added lights to every window. Each window has its own type of light. For example, this one is just a simple window-shaped light, and they are mostly that. For example, this one, it's the same, but just a little bigger. Here you can see I've got a stained glass too, so still 3 lights here. And this is giving the room still a bit of color on the ground. I think that looks pretty cool. Here is a simple one, a bit larger. Sometimes it works better with the different kinds of lights, even though the windows are the same. But the important thing is to make it look good in the room. And also, I think this is worth mentioning, in the general map on the exterior, the sunlight is coming from the top left corner, because all the shadows are at the bottom right. But inside the house, I've chosen to put a light on every window. So inside, the assets are lightened by the window side and not the sunlight direction. So I think we can call this semi-realistic lighting, and for me that's totally enough. I think you just need to make the map look good enough for you, and this is what works for me, so that's how I do it. One last thing I would like to show you about lights is this light here. It's a little trick that helps representing stairs going up. So, for example, if you have stairs that would go down, it's easy. You just put some shadow like this. It's visual. They are going down. Sometimes you don't know how to represent that when they go up. So my technique is that around the top of the stairs, I put a light like this. So it doesn't really make sense in a realistic way, but it tricks your brain into thinking that this is lower than this part. So yeah, that was my little trick for stairs. We are reaching the end of this video now, so first of all I'd like to thank you all for watching and staying with me for so long, and I hope that wasn't too painful to watch. Hopefully this video was helpful, and maybe now you wanna try the mod. That would be cool. The mod is available for free on cartographyassets.com, and if you want to reach out to me, you can do it on the official Megasploit Discord. The link is in the description. And on this note, I wish you all a happy mapping.